So thank you for coming today. I'm happy to talk about a conceit that is my father, and I have a relationship with my father, but I hope through talking about him I can present some thoughts about the broader topic of Asian American art or Chinese diasporic art, or what is Chinese art, what's art more generally. I think all these issues arise through the discussion of my father and also many other artists. The question when, it's great to be here again with Mark, my friend and collaborator for many years. We haven't seen each other for years. But it is called Asian American Art, a History, 1850 to 1970. So right in the title, you can see there's certain problems, or certain challenges or questions. First of all, what's Asian American? What's art? Why 1850 to 1970? And I could talk for 2 hours about any of those three questions right there, and so I sort of will. So Asian American is neologism, is a new word invented around 1969. My friend of mine, Yuji Ichioka, who was a graduate student at UC Berkeley, invented the term at the time because there was an anti-war demonstration and there was a contingent of people who were supposed to go off to protest, and they were all of Asian ancestry. And they wanted to know under what banner should they march. So they said Orientals against the war. Didn't really sound right because Orientals is what we call Asian Americans. That's how we were called at the time. So Yuji thought, well, how about Asian American? And he just kind of pulled it out of the air. And Yuji was a historian. And so it sort of stuck. It sort of stuck, and the federal government actually ratified that term under Richard Nixon and said, now we have all these different ethnic categories and we have to get data about all these things. So, but then the content, what is Asian American, is still sort of contested and not all that clear. But we, every day, in everyday use, we use the term all the time. So the term Asian American, as we decided very early on in the book, was it would refer to those people of Asian ancestry who lived and worked for a substantial part of their careers in the United States, period. Asian American art, we could have said, was a category that required certain aesthetic, artistic, thematic, media criteria to say this is Asian American art. As some of you may know, in Asian American literature, there are those who say Asian American literature, you have to have X, Y, Z, so forth, to be called Asian American literature, an ethnic checklist. We rejected that because that seemed to be too limited. So there are many basic issues which we could go on and talk about here. 1850 we started because that was the first, at the time, it was the first identifiable artist of Asian ancestry we had images of. 1970 we sort of stopped there because beyond 1970 it was too much stuff and became much more complicated, and the term Asian American became ubiquitous, used widely at the time, and therefore people became self-consciously Asian American, and all sorts of other issues sort of arose. So those are the different issues just in the title itself, which we can talk about more later. I hope I presented that history well. So now Mark was really the initiator of that project, which began to culminate the project, and he came to me one day and said, are you the son of Shu-chi Chang? And I said, yes, and phoned me, and we got to be good friends, and set me off on a path that I've appreciated ever since, and that is really set me off to think much more and study and think about my father and also his times and context of what kind of work he did. The talk I'm going to give today, a very brief talk, is based upon some work I've done on him since I've become interested in him. And some of this I presented actually, the last time I presented this was in China, at the, in Hangzhou, at the Zhejiang Meishuguan, at the Hangzhou Art Academy, which art museum that had a big show of my father's work just a couple of years ago. Now, I think Edward said something quite important, and that is to talk about the problems and dilemmas of an artist, a diasporic artist, or an artist that has multiple sites of production and life, and that was truly true of my father. And so the talk I gave sort of plays on that dilemma, on that challenge, on that motion He was never fixed in a position. And I talk about the diplomacy of art, that is art also, how his art was employed in various ways to negotiate between various audiences and nations and peoples between China and America. My father was born in 1900 near Hangzhou in central China, and died young in 1957. He was born in China, but died in Piedmont, California, which is where I grew up, right across the bay. And I start off talking about him to illustrate this dilemma, this challenge, or this opportunity, with two images which I like very much. Both of them are photos were taken in the United States. The one on the left was taken by photographer Myron Davis for Life magazine. And my father had a feature on him in Life magazine in 1943 or 44. And Davis took this picture of him, I think in San Francisco or somewhere, he said his paint. And you can see he deliberately had in his Chinese gown. And my father generally did not paint in silks. You know, it's kind of messy and so forth, but there he is, quite distinguished sort of, you know, scholar, Chinese scholar and so forth. Well then, on the right is also another photo of him taken around the same time on Commercial Avenue in San Francisco by a commercial photographer. And there he looks, as I said to friends, it's his Humphrey Bogart look. There he is in his wool suit with this, what's this, Avedon, Richard Avedon sort of photo. He's got his cigarette here, smoke coming up, and a little bit of shadow on his. So those are both of his personas. That's both of them are him. He's both of them. So he could be both. And his art was, in a sense, both, or caught between, or split, however you want to explore that. Now, how did he come to this position? As I said, he grew up near Hangzhou, in a small village that I visited a few years ago. And he distinguished himself as a talent. His uncle was an artist, and so he got interested in formal art training quite early on in his life as a youngster. And then he dedicated himself to art quite early. He went to art school, and eventually he went and associated with one of the first classes of the first modern art school academy in China, operated by the famous art educator and artist Liu Haisu, who you see here on the left, and my father has an arm around him. Again, kind of, if you look at the clothes, I think it's very good. Edward talked about through the looking glass, and it was fun to talk about clothes and art. And if you look at the clothes people wear, it's also telling because it's a certain issue of personal identity. And there you see on the right a photo, Liu Haisu and my father and other students and teachers at the college. And there, this college, he learned, my father, even though he picked up Chinese brush painting from the family and from friends, his first formal training, in fact, was with Western technique. And at Liu Haisu's academy, that's all they taught. They did not teach Western brush painting. The reason I'm going into this is because when we talk about what is Chinese painting or what's Chinese American painting, we had to go back a little bit and to even complicate it to say that, look, even Chinese painting in the early 20th century was undergoing quite a revolution, quite a big change. And what we think of traditional Chinese painting was already under assault and transformation as early as the turn of the century, in the 1920s, certainly when he went to school. Now this is the Shanghai Early Academy there, and you can see, I think, a very interesting photo of my father. Now he's in a Chinese gown, as you can see right there, in a school that teaches Western art, and you can see in the background the students' artwork. And it's all, you can see pastels or all oil color sketches and this type of thing. Very, very sort of traditional European style. A woman here, I don't know who she is, Liu Zhongren is in the back of my father, I think. Some of you know who Liu Zhongren is, and also down here. And so I'm not even sure who did those paintings behind them. But at the time, there were many in China who feared for China's art tradition and sought other ways to revitalize Chinese art tradition, including one of his, my father's friends and intellectual who did this, as you can see, very capable sketch of my father, but illustrating the portraiture approach that already many, and the realism that many Chinese art teachers were espousing at the time. Liu Haisu, I should say, was sometimes said, or he styled himself as the Van Gogh of China, because he went to Europe and also picked up, painted in a way that looked like sort of Van Gogh. Well, these are other Huang Binhong and others that my father, as an art teacher, he was an art teacher, professional artist for most of his life, and involved with very important artists. My father was, I'm not sure all of your backgrounds in Chinese art, but my father is said to be in the tradition of Ren Guanyan and Wu Changshuo, and some southern boneless freehand style of painting, and became good friends with many of these artists here. Was really closely associated with them. Some of them very quite prominent, particularly Pantian Shou, so who has been displayed here in recent years. Well, my father became quite popular and accepted and successful in the 1930s, and somehow made connections with the Chinese top elite, that is the Song family. And he became friends with Madame Chiang Kai-shek, and in particular with Madame Chiang Kai-shek's brother-in-law, H.H. Gung, Hong Shang-shi, whom you see, I don't have a pointer, right here. And this is Wang Shijie, I think it's Wang Shijie here, the Chinese minister. Hong Shang-shi was like the 63rd direct descendant of Confucius, but he was also Minister of Finance of China and married to Chiang Kai-shek, Madame Chiang Kai-shek's sister, very powerful family, and a patron of the arts and also of the Asia's China House in New York. And my father painted this large painting here, you see in the background, on the occasion of President Roosevelt's third election. And this is in Chongqing in 1940, December, Christmas Day 1940, when he gave this painting to Ambassador Nelson, U.S. Ambassador Nelson Johnson. So it made my father quite famous. This was sent to the U.S. through diplomatic channels, and then eventually went to the Roosevelt family, and it's still at the Hyde Park. And this is a color photo of it, and a very beautiful, it's a very large painting, as you see, unusual for Chinese paintings, and 100 doves or messengers of peace, and became quite famous for this painting. And you can see some of the brushwork, which my father excelled in, but also there's a clear sort of naturalism, if you will, that my father picked up in his sketching, in his early art training. It's quite, you can say, accurate, realistic naturalism, but it looks like, very Chinese, but also very accessible for Western audiences who were interested in more perspective and shading and shadow. And this was actually even mentioned by Nelson Johnson, who said he was quite taken by this. So it's a very adept choice by the central government to give to Roosevelt because it's Chinese, but also accessible. So already you see sort of this hybridity, if you will, this combination of Western and Chinese elements. He also, my father gave a painting to Winston Churchill, and this is at the Churchill home in England, as you see here. Now, in September 1941, he came to the United States, sent on a diplomatic passport to help promote U.S.-China relations, friendly relations between the United States and China, through a kind of a cultural ambassador. And he came to the United States to paint, to demonstrate, to give paintings and raise money for United China Relief. It didn't talk much about politics, but talked about Chinese art as a way of befriending Americans and to have sympathy with the Chinese people and their culture. And so he gave art, it was very, very active, energetic, frantic life that he had through the war years, where he gave major exhibitions at major institutions all around the country, the Metropolitan in New York, the Portland, Kansas City Rockefeller Museum, the Young Museum, Chicago Art Institute, LA County Museum, every major art museum, and many colleges, including Stanford. And when I went through and started looking at my collection, I found a painting that actually said, done at Stanford University in 1944. It's kind of neat to have. And my office actually is right across the street from where he demonstrated. Well, here he said, now look at his dress. Here he is right off the boat in a sense, but quite dressed up as a Westernized or Western intellectual here in front of, some of you must know these buildings, but do any of you not know where this is? Edward, do you know where this is? You know where it is. This is the DeYoung Museum in Golden Gate Park.
They don't have that side, they don't have wall.
This no longer exists. It's torn down, and this is where the new DeYoung, beautiful building, but this is the old DeYoung. And I kind of grew up here. I remember going to the museum a lot. We lived in East Bay, he'd come over. I'm not born yet here, but later on in the 50s, I kind of ran around this place and ran around the Lily Pond and all this type of stuff. But again, here he has, identified himself with Western art tradition. I think this is in the Seattle Art Museum, Seattle, I think. And give demonstrations such as this, and he's captivated an audience and very interested in painting, which was so unusual, such a challenge to Western audiences, how to paint standing up on a canvas down below. Now that's quite common, right? And with a brush held unusual way here, and not on an easel like this, and he would paint very, very quickly, and then not from a set model, and finish a composition in a few months. He could. And was honored in UC Berkeley, and there's Washington D.C. and helped to see Roosevelt, or got to see Roosevelt. And so you can see some of his paintings in the background. That's the kind of work that he did. He focused on birds and flowers, which was one of the main genre of Chinese painting. A lot of these pictures, you have a lot of women in these pictures. It's the war years, but this is kind of the crowd here. But they're fun to look at. And again, you see how he's dressed here, a very nice tie and jacket, but also painting in a way that seemed to be very, very different. And we could talk further about what possible influences he might have had on American painters at the time, who came, people up in the Seattle area or in California or in New York, who were taken with this new kind of brush technique and vibrancy, energy. And this is the painting featured in Life magazine. He didn't like this feature because it emphasized the speed of his painting. In America, he said, he was always interested in speed and rapidity, quickness, and it emphasized this, and he saw this really sort of trivialized his work. After the war, he was caught here during the war. As I said, he came in September 41. Pearl Harbor is in December 41. So he's here until 1945, 46. He returns to China to try to pursue his art career with other artists. And here is Westlake in Hangzhou and others. You can see him here. And he was asked to head the China Art Academy that was going to be set up here. Again, famous Westlake in China. And rejoined his family, of course, many relatives. But then he had also continued his ties with the Chinese elite. These guys look pretty elite here. It also looks like something from a Zhang Yimou movie or something like that. Shanghai Triad or something. This is Li Zhongren here. Sorry for that. And now during the war years, he also met a woman, a Chinese-American woman. Again, sort of his international connection, and this woman here would become his wife and my mother. She was the third generation Chinese American. His brother is here. Some of you may be from Fudan. It was his brother, his younger brother, was a specialist in Chinese linguistics. Zhang Shu. And this is my mother, his mother, and Shu-chi, and others here and he led a very established, successful artist at the highest level for a Chinese intellectual and artist. And but then with politics and the revolution, he left and came to the United States. It was a very difficult decision. He almost didn't leave. He sent my mother and me as an infant back to the United States first, but he had so many ties, both professionally and personally and emotionally, that it was very difficult for him to leave, and thinking that he may never return. Of course, it was unclear in 1948-49 what was going to happen. But he comes to the United States, and he continues to associate with Chinese diaspora. Brochure here. This is I think a restaurant in Berkeley, Chinese restaurant in Berkeley. This is me, I think. And my mother, and this is Chen Li Fu here in our home in King, I think it's, or his home, or someone's home in East Bay. And you can read this as sort of playing with poetry that expresses longing and displacement. And he's practicing here on that. Now, as I said, he was connected to the elite. These are collaborations he did with Madame Chiang Kai-shek. She did these actually in Berkeley, and she traveled to the United States quite often, and they would get together and paint together. Now, I'll talk about a little bit about his painting, and I'll try to give you some sense of kind of the range of his painting. He was very adept at kind of traditional bird and flowers, but also brought a certain, I would think, a new certain vibrancy and energy to the painting, using the brush in really quite exemplary ways. This is a screen, interesting, done on a Japanese screen on paper. And I think he probably must have done this in the United States. He bought the Japanese screen probably in San Francisco, Chinatown or something, and did the painting of sunflowers. Now, the significance of the sunflowers is, I gave you a hint earlier. Who would think of sunflowers? Van Gogh, and Van Gogh is connected to Western painting, and he's connected to Liu Haisu, who is considered to be Van Gogh of China, and my father was a student of Liu Haisu. So there may be some genealogy, but nevertheless, it's, I think, a very striking composition, one of the ones I think the most elegant masterpiece, which you can see the color and the brush is very deliberate and heavy and colorful, but also very calligraphic in its rapid use of wash and various brushes here. And also, you can see the very unusual color for Chinese artists. These were all done in the 40s and 50s. That sort of unusual composition that he explored with, because also now as he's transitioning to the United States, he's facing new audiences. And then the challenge is, how does a Chinese artist make a living in the United States when Americans did not have much of a tradition, or very many people had buying paintings. China, people bought Chinese all the time, and Chinese artists could live off the sale of their paintings. In the United States, they couldn't. For one, because there was not that tradition of buying popularly, people buying original artwork, but also artwork they were not familiar with. So there's issues of his audience and his sales, and also I think exposure to Western techniques, and I'm not sure if this is harkening to certain Chinese themes or approaches, but also there's a certain almost modernism, I would say, of the simplicity and approach to some of his efforts here. I remember in 1956 or something like that, going with my father to the movies, and we went with Kirk Douglas to watch the film Lust for Life, a biographical movie on Vincent van Gogh. And my mother said something to me that I had said, I said, "Dad, don't become so famous that you want to cut off your ear or something." Well, here is also now transitioning to become, in the United States, here, Lake Tahoe. This is our backyard where he makes his Punta here, bonsai here, and where the forest here are taken with roots. Again, the sensitivity inherited from Chinese, from China, and it's my brother here, we're taking a big root here. And then he begins to experiment with new sorts of painting techniques in the Western circumstance here. This was in the 40s and 50s. This was done probably in the 50s. And here he's even using sort of new media, including using sponges, like kitchen sponge here to put the paint on like this, and it's become more abstract, if you will. Here, playing with the use of his brush techniques, but of a subject that should have been very familiar to California audiences at the time. And is it to you? Where is this?
Point Globals?
Close.
Long time.
Close, sir.
Long time.
Long, yes, Pebble Beach.
Pebble Beach.
It's still there. It looks like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and this is done on paper, Western watercolor paper, not rice paper. And then he goes to, he wrote books. He was planning a book on Yosemite, and he did sketch works. So there you can see sort of El Capitan here, and inspired by maybe Half Dome or something like that. So this was his draft book on Yosemite, a visit to Yosemite, as you see here, and El Capitan back there. Now, he did try to find a way to make a living, and that was to sell reproductions. And Americans did use a lot of reproductions and stationary greeting cards, and some of the younger audience here, but early audience, and these were everywhere, I would just say, in the Chinese curio shops up and down Grant Avenue, in the stationery stores. I'm a traditional historian. I go to archives. I look at people's papers. I find my father's stuff in people's papers. You know, they use it for correspondence. Joseph Nolan or other, they find the stuff, and people were using this. It's kind of very interesting connection. So you can see this is sort of Oriental or Asian. It's certainly not familiar to most American audiences, but ways that he could produce unusual compositions for Chinese, using white, using snow color of this sort, and selling this as greeting cards for Christmas. And wrote a book as he was dying in 1956 and 57 from cancer, and then translated by my mother. Oops. So, to end, quick sort of how to end. After he passed away, because of his circumstances, because he died young, he didn't have many disciples or students in the United States. He had some. His connections with China had ended. And his artwork, because it looks sort of traditional, it was not Cultural Revolution looking, it was not sort of literati painting you could find in Taiwan, it sort of disappeared. And he disappeared from art history. And he didn't appear in American art history, even though he had a substantial career at the Young Museum, for example. And he didn't appear in Chinese art history because it didn't fit. He did not fit in either canon. And his paintings in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and the early 90s, we couldn't even give away. Then things changed in the 90s, the China market revolution, and also beginning to re-examine 20th century art history. And he was rediscovered. You know, art history is not given, it's found, it's constructed. And he was rediscovered, and now, as I said 2 years ago in Hangzhou, we had 250 pieces of his paintings at display at the Zhejiang Art, one of the major art museums in the country. And one of his paintings, I have it on a flash drive, I can show it to you later on, just sold at Christie's about 3 months ago. A painting that he did for Kong Xiangxi. It sold for almost $700,000. So it's basically nothing to 700,000. Well, it was a very special painting in this time. It showed the turnaround in Chinese art collecting, but also sensibilities and money in China. Now, and this sort of shows the trials and difficulties of a diasporic artist who, when he passed away, was successful, but then slipped into obscurity. And I think he'd probably be pretty happy to be rediscovered today in China, but also now, once again, in the United States, being seen as connected to the very vibrant scene of artists of Asian ancestry who lived and thrived in sort of in the United States. So I'll stop here. Thank you, Emerson.